I still remember the first moment I met Daniel, though nothing about that day was remarkable. It was one of those quiet autumn mornings where the world feels half awake, the sky covered with a soft blanket of clouds, and the smell of warm bread from the bakery drifts lazily through the air. I was running late for work, again, with my coffee tipping dangerously in my hand, and my hair tied in a knot that was already falling apart. I pushed open the door to the publishing house where I worked, hoping no one would notice my lateness, and that was exactly when I collided with him. Books flew everywhere. My coffee spilled across the floor like it was performing its own tragic scene. And right in the middle of all that chaos stood Daniel, looking amused, confused, and oddly charming with a stack of manuscripts that had now become a messy paper waterfall around us. I dropped to my knees, embarrassed beyond words, trying to gather everything before anyone else noticed. He knelt too, his fingers brushing against mine as we both reached for the same book. "I'm so sorry," I blurted out, cheeks burning. "No, no," he said with a soft laugh that felt warm enough to melt my panic. "I wasn't looking. My fault." That laugh. I didn't know it then, but it would become something I'd memorize, something I'd crave, something that years later would echo painfully in places where he no longer was. He introduced himself, Daniel, and I told him my name, Emma. And then, just like that, he was gone. But life has a funny way of bringing the right person back when you least expect it, though sometimes the right person can still bring the wrong ending. A few days later, he came again to deliver manuscripts. Then again, and again. Sometimes he came with a question that didn't really need answering. Sometimes he pretended he forgot something. Once he showed up saying he had lost his pen, but he didn't seem too upset when I told him I hadn't seen it. It didn't take a genius to know he was coming to see me, though I pretended I believed every excuse he offered. It was cute, innocent, and for the first time in a long while, someone was paying attention to me in a way that felt genuine. One evening, after my shift, I found him standing outside the building holding 2 cups of coffee. "This one has a lid," he said with a grin, handing it to me. I laughed, and it felt natural to walk beside him as we wandered down Maple Street, talking about everything and nothing. He listened, really listened when I spoke, even to the boring parts of my day. And I learned he was the kind of man who looked at the world gently, even when the world wasn't gentle with him. Those walks became something I looked forward to. Soon they turned into dinners, then into late-night conversations that stretched past midnight. One night, standing beneath a flickering streetlight, he looked at me with a softness I'd never seen in anyone's eyes before. "I think I'm falling for you," he whispered, and I felt something inside me settle, not explode, not spark, just settle, like it had finally found where it belonged. "I think I'm falling too," I whispered back, and we kissed, softly, carefully, like we both knew how fragile beginnings can be. But love has a way of making you blind to the red flags that are waving right in front of you. Daniel was caring, gentle, attentive, but he had shadows. Shadows he pretended weren't there, and I pretended not to notice. Sometimes he disappeared for days. No explanation, no messages, no returned calls. When he resurfaced, he said he was dealing with stuff. What stuff? He never said. And I, in the foolish optimism of love, convinced myself that one day he'd trust me enough to tell me everything. I overlooked the emotional distance that crept in randomly. I ignored the way he sometimes held me like he was afraid I'd vanish, and the way he sometimes woke up acting like he didn't remember falling asleep in love with me. I told myself his inconsistencies were just scars from a difficult past. And maybe they were. But they were also warning signs, and I should have listened. One cold Wednesday morning, everything changed. He knocked on my apartment door at sunrise. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair messy, his eyes swollen and red, not from tears but from complete exhaustion. He stepped inside without waiting and stood in the middle of my living room like he was about to confess something terrible. "We need to talk," he said. And suddenly the air felt too thin, too sharp, too heavy. He paced, ran his fingers through his hair, avoided my eyes. "I'm leaving," he said finally. It felt like the world dropped from under my feet. "Leaving where?" My voice sounded so small. "Town, the state, everything." His words trembled, even though he was trying to hide it. "Why?" I whispered. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," he said quickly, reaching for my hands. "You are the best thing that's ever happened to me. That's why I have to go." It made no sense. Not then, not until much later. I begged him to explain, to let me help, to let me stay with him. But he only shook his head and said something that shattered me completely. "Please don't wait for me." That was his goodbye. No closure, no answers. Just a wound he left me to bleed alone. He kissed my forehead with trembling lips, turned around and walked out of my life. And for the longest time, I believed that moment was the beginning of my heartbreak. I didn't know then that my real heartbreak would come later, when I learned the truth. A year passed. A year of me convincing myself to move on, but never really doing it. A year of checking my phone even when I knew he wasn't calling. A year of walking to the places we used to go, hoping maybe he'd be there. A year of dreaming about him, waking up missing him, and going to sleep wishing he'd come back. Everyone around me told me to forget him. "He's never coming back," they said. "He didn't deserve you," they repeated. And for a while, I tried to believe them. But grief lives in the bones, not the brain, and my bones remembered him too much. Then one rainy evening, as I locked up the office, I saw him. He stood across the street, soaked from the downpour, staring at me as if he wasn't sure I was real. My breath caught, my heart stumbled, my hands went numb. He walked toward me slowly, like approaching a scared animal that might run away. "Emma," he said, voice barely louder than the rain. 1,000 emotions crashed into me at once: anger, love, confusion, longing, pain. "You disappeared," I said, my voice cracking, "for a year." "I know," he whispered, "and I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." "Why?" My eyes burned. "Why did you leave me like that?" He looked away, swallowed hard, and for a moment I thought he wasn't going to answer again. Instead, he broke. Right there, in the rain. His shoulders shook, and he covered his face as tears mixed with the storm. Finally, he spoke. "I was sick, Emma." My heart clenched. "Sick? What do you mean?" "I didn't want you to see me dying." The world stopped. He told me he had cancer, that the doctors didn't think he'd survive, that he left because he didn't want me to spend months watching him fade away. He went through chemo alone, complications alone, nights of pain alone. He didn't tell his family. He didn't let anyone in. "I thought disappearing would spare you," he said. "I thought you deserved to live your life without watching me fall apart." "You idiot," I whispered through trembling lips. "You stupid, stupid idiot." And I cried, not just for what he had done to me, but for what he had endured alone. When the storm softened into a drizzle, he said, "I'm not asking you to take me back. I'm just asking you to know the truth. And if someday you want me in your life, even as a friend, I'll be here." Then he stepped back, waiting to see if I'd stop him. I didn't. I let him walk away because healing sometimes means choosing yourself. But life has its own strange rhythm. Months passed, and though I didn't reach out to him, I didn't hate him either. I was healing slowly, breathing easier, hurting less. One evening, I found an envelope under my door. No name, no handwriting I recognized. Inside was a note that simply said, "Thank you for being the reason I fought to survive." I cried that night, not because of pain, but because my heart finally understood something. You can love someone deeply and still choose not to go back. Almost a year later, I saw him again, this time at the park we once visited together. He was sitting quietly on a bench, watching the sunset like it was something fragile. And something inside me whispered that it was time. I walked to him. He looked up, surprised, hopeful. "Hey," I said softly. He smiled, and it wasn't the broken smile he once wore. It was gentle, peaceful. We talked about life, about choices, about forgiveness. "Do you still love me?" I asked, not because I wanted him back, but because I needed to hear the truth. "Yes," he said without hesitation, "but loving you doesn't mean I need to have you. I just want you to be happy, even if your happiness isn't with me." For the first time, his love didn't feel heavy. It felt safe, respectful, real. As the sun disappeared behind the horizon, we sat in silence, two people who once held each other tightly, now holding nothing but peace. I didn't go back to him. He didn't ask me to. Some stories aren't meant to return to where they began, but they still matter. Daniel was not my forever, but he changed the way I understood love. He taught me that leaving isn't always about not loving. Sometimes it's about loving too much. He taught me that healing can take time, that forgiveness can be soft, and that closure can come quietly, without grand gestures. And now, when I walk past Maple Street and feel the crisp autumn air, I don't ache anymore. I don't feel abandoned. I don't feel broken. I smile. Because even though I lost him, I found myself. And sometimes that is the greatest love story of all.